This is a video demonstration of the Behavior Intervention Reporting Form. This is actually a hard copy form that you will write out, and your director or administrator will use that information to fill out an online form that goes to the state. So it's very important that you provide good, accurate detail so that your director or administrator has enough information that is necessary to give to the state. In this training, I'm able to actually go through and show you the various parts of this behavior intervention reporting form, and you can kind of follow along, and I'll give you some examples, talk about things that are really crucial, and hopefully that will assist you in filling out the form properly. So at the top, we have some information that's rather easy to understand and figure out. You're asking for the date that you are writing this report, as well as the name of the person that you are writing the report for. So this is the person who had the behavior intervention. The date of birth can be found in the person's file, as well as the names of the psychotropic medications that they might be on. If they are not on a psychotropic medication, simply put none. This is the space where you will put your name, because you are the person filling it out. We want to know that name. And it's also very important that we include the names of all the other people who were involved in the restraint. So if they were involved in some way or form in terms of helping to restrain, and of course that can only be staff, make sure you put the names down for that. Down here we have the date of the restraint. So you're going to put the actual date that the restraint happened, as well as the location of the restraint. When you're entering in the location of the restraint, it is really important that, especially if the person is out of the home, for instance, if they're in the community, it's important that you actually put the address of where the restraint occurred. So in other words, if you happen to restrain this person at Cub Foods in a specific city, you would name that address of the Cub Foods and not just say Cub Foods. Next, you will describe the physical and social environment where the person was at shortly before the restraint. And this should include the people who were present leading up to and during the restraint. When you are talking about the physical environment, you want to include things as kind of the general location of where the person was, what kind of room was it, what kind of facility was it, if they were out in the community, what was the area like. Take note of whether or not it was loud or chaotic, or was it calm. Note whether it may have been too hot or too cold for that person. Just have a general understanding of that person's sensory needs and how those affect the person's behavior and what role that may have played into the behaviors that occurred. Then you will shortly describe the social environment, again talking about kind of the interactions that were going on with the person and the people around him. Was this person kind of isolating? Was this person having friendly interactions with the housemates? Were housemates being loud? Were staff making a lot of demands on him? Was it kind of loud and chaotic and noisy? What was kind of going on in terms of the social situations for that person? And then it's important down here that you indicate the people who were present leading up to and during that restraint. So this would be the staff who were present. You would indicate how many of the person's housemates or peers were there. However, you would not list them by name. If there were other family members around, you would indicate that there were family members. If there were other people in the community around, give a rough estimate of how many people were around at that time. Down here, you are going to describe the mental, physical, and emotional condition of the person, as well as the specific behaviors the person displayed during and actually before and during implementation of the intervention. So this one is kind of tough for staff, but this is actually a very important one because we need to have this information, and we want to use this to actually analyze and really show that it was necessary to do the restraint. So in regards to talking about the mental condition of the person, talk a little bit about whether they were they seemed to be kind of a clear mind, or were they talking irrationally. Kind of talk about their cognitive state. What were some of the things that they were talking about? What were some of the things that they were doing? Did the person seem confused at all at that time? Was there processing? Did it seem slower than normal? One of the really important things that you note is just any changes in the person's normal mental condition and their ability to process, their ability to make judgments, their ability to reason with you as a staff. Make some indications about that. Be very clear and be as detailed as you can about this. Then you're also going to talk about the physical condition. And again, this may address kind of their energy level that they had at the time. You may indicate whether or not the person appeared to be ill, whether the person appeared to be upbeat, whether the person seemed kind of lethargic, what sort of things was the person doing. Were they had they been up for a while? Maybe they were really tired. Maybe they just got out of bed. You can also indicate whether the person had a cold or some other illnesses, or whether the person just seemed to be really, really tired at that time. So those are kind of some physical things that you want to indicate. Another one would be if the person appeared to have a headache, or they were showing any other signs of any sort of illness. Down here, you're going to make note of the emotional condition before the situation happened. So with a lot of this, we really want to kind of show the progression that the person went through before he actually had been in the restraints. So we're going to talk about how the person may have started to be rather calm, or he appeared when he came out of his room that he was agitated. You indicate the emotions that you saw, and what was it about that person that you kind of saw that those were emotions. If you think back to your AIT class, you think about those warning signs of agitation. So you may want to indicate some of those things, that perhaps the person was shaking, the person was crying, the person was talking loudly, the person was talking very rapidly, the person was repeating things over and over and over. We're looking for those sort of things that kind of indicate the emotional state that the person was in well before this restraint occurred. And so then down here, you really want to talk about kind of the progression that the person went through to get to that crisis stage. So if you think about the optimal stage, the warning sign stage, and the crisis stage, talk about the things that you saw. Be really detailed in the events that got the person worked up. Be detailed in the things that were perhaps triggering the person's behaviors. Talk about some of the interactions that he may have had with another staff person or a housemate. Talk about the things that were agitating the person, and give us a really clear picture of how that kind of evolved. We don't want you to write that he's just started to become agitated or that he just started to become aggressive. Really give us a clear picture of how the whole situation progressed up to that point where you finally realize that this person needed to be restrained. Here we are actually going to check off which behavior that person was displaying that required the restraint. And of course, only these behaviors can actually elicit a response from you to restrain the person. So one of these things better apply. We're going to start with the physical aggression. So that is a physical aggression that happens to you as the staff person, or it could be another staff person. It could be that person's peer or housemates, or it could be, perhaps somebody in the community. So this does not include aggressions that they are displaying towards themselves. That is where you're going to put or indicate for self-injury. So self-injurious behaviors, that includes banging their head on a floor or banging their head on a wall. It could also mean biting themselves or hitting themselves in the head or other areas of their body. So they are actually doing something to themselves to hurt themselves. Down here is more of a risk of personal safety. So this might be a situation where the person is really putting themselves at risk of being harmed. That could include that they're about to run into a very busy street or highway, or jumping off of a tall ledge or bridge, something like that. The property destruction is very important. The state did indicate that property destruction in and of itself is not a reason to do a manual restraint on somebody. So the property destruction that we're talking about here are situations where that actual property destruction could harm themselves or possibly others. So an example would be where they are punching a window. Of course, if you punch a window hard enough, then that window will break and they will cut themselves. Punching walls or things like very hard objects like that could cause injury to their hands. So it's important to understand that we should only be restraining people for property destruction if that property destruction could actually cause harm to them. Down here, you will check off and indicate what type of restraint you used. That would be either be a manual restraint in which you or somebody physically held the person, or it would be a mechanical restraint in which you have used a helmet, a harness, or a restraint chair, or some sort of mechanical restraint to hold the person immobile. Down here we are going to see the time that the restraint was actually implemented and then terminated. So these are over here is where you're going to indicate the actual time that you started the restraint, and you will then indicate the time that you actually ended that restraint. So this does not count the situations in which you kind of attempted to reduce the restraint or let go a little bit and kind of tested them. We're looking at the actual start times and the end times, and so you should indicate the times on that, and then also you should indicate the total number of minutes that went by during that restraint. Down here we talk about the PRN, whether or not that was offered to the person, and if it was offered, was it in fact administered. So you need to indicate yes or no for each one of those. In this space, it's really important to indicate any sort of injuries that happen as a result of the restraint. Now that could be an injury that happened to the person who was restrained, or it could be an injury that happened to any staff who were involved with the restraint, who were doing the restraint. Could be a person who was just kind of got in the way and maybe they got punched or hit. It could actually be somebody's peer. So we're really looking at anybody who may have been hurt in this situation. Please indicate whether someone was hurt and what type of injury that they got and who it was that was injured. Once again, if the injury occurred to somebody's housemate, so it's another person getting services, it is important that you do not put their name down. Simply indicate that it was somebody's peer. In this section, you are going to talk about the less restrictive alternative measures that were attempted to de-escalate the situation and maintain safety before the restraint was implemented. So this is where you want to talk about all of your de-escalation techniques that you tried with the person. Talk about changes that you made in the environment. Talk about things that you did in terms of your communication, how you may have approached the person with a different, softer, calmer communication. Talk about ways that you redirected a person. You be very specific about what you redirected them to. So if you redirected them to a different conversation about topics that they enjoyed, talk about what those topics were. Also, if you redirected them to a different activity, indicate what those activities were. If there are any other changes that you made, to the surroundings, if there were things that, other things that you were attempted, please indicate all of those things. It's very important that we show in our forms the attempts that we are trying to use other than restraining a person, and that we are showing that this really was the restraint was the least restrictive measure, that we didn't have any other options, that those other options weren't working. Right here is where you will indicate the time when the de-escalation began. So really that means the time that you noticed that the person was agitated, they were showing some warning signs, and so you started to make some attempts to de-escalate that person. And below that you will indicate the total amount of time between that moment that you realized the person needed to be de-escalated and you started those de-escalation attempts until when the person finally got restrained, essentially. In this section you will describe the restraint that was used and the resulting outcome. It is important that you are detailed about the restraint. Do not simply name it as a one-person restraint or a two-person restraint. Actually describe what it looked like in terms, for example, the staff stood behind the person and held on to his one arm with both of the staff's hands, or you may indicate that two staff restrained him. Each of them held on to one of his arms next to his side as he was standing up. Also indicate the outcome of what happened when the staff put the restraint on the person. So did the person struggle? Was the person immediately calm? Did they have periods of calm and then struggle? Did the person yell out a lot? Did the person try to drop to the floor? How did the person respond to being restrained? You can indicate how long it took for the person to finally calm to the point where you release the restraint. However, you will do that further down in the worksheet. And down here you will indicate again the physical mental and emotional condition of the person after the intervention. So once the intervention was done and the person was released from the restraint, indicate these three conditions again, using similar words that we talked about before. So with the mental condition, talk about how the person was processing. Were they able to follow the directions of the staff? Was the person rather rational? What were the things that the person was saying? What were some of those indications? For the physical, you may indicate, whether the person was extremely tired, whether they were still very energetic, whether they were indicating some sort of pain, anything like that you notice physically about this person. And then emotional, we really want to talk about the emotional state of that person. Did the person start out rather agitated even once the restraint was done, or was the person relatively calm? Were they apologetic? Was the person crying? Was the person very angry with the staff? Indicate some of those things that talk about the person's emotional state after he was released from the intervention. And right here, this is a very crucial part of restraints and what happens after restraints, and that is the debriefing. So indicate the date and the time, the staff name, and any comments about the debriefing process that you went through. We want to know about the debriefing process that you went through with that person. And so what were the comments about that, and what was talked about, and what did the staff say, and how did the person respond? But it's also important to debrief with each other as a staff. So make sure you're sitting down with other staff who are present and talking about the situation. Talk about what worked and what did not work. Talk about how the situation started. Talk about what were some of the things that you decided on, and what were some of the things that all the staff agreed on, and what were some of the things that we learned from the situation that we can perhaps change and prevent a situation like that the next time. So it's really something that we owe to the person to try to figure out better ways of handling that situation, and that we're kind of doing some brainstorming with each other and debriefing to come up with better solutions. And then, of course, at the bottom, very important that you put the signature of you, and that you indicate the date. So there is kind of a brief explanation on how to do the BIRF. The big thing is make sure that you include a lot of detail. Also make sure that you're very objective, that you're only using facts. We don't want to see people's opinions in here. We don't want to hear about their beliefs or anything like that. Be very factual, be very matter of fact, and really list the events that occurred during this situation. Give us a really good picture. We want to be able to use this to learn from the situation and just really improve the person's quality of life.